I want to take a few minutes and talk about the format for the final examination. The final examination is 2 weeks from today. In Google Classroom, there is a link to this spreadsheet. This spreadsheet has in it 17 essay questions. The 3 that we are adding today are the last 3. There are no new essay questions next week. The day you come, or before you come to take the final, pick one of these 17 that you are very confident you could answer correctly and accurately on a blank piece of paper if I just gave you those words. Please, for the one you pick, try to remember the number. It's okay if you don't remember it, but it makes it easier on me if you do. So let's imagine you really like explain French and Raven's 5 categories of power. You'd want to remember that's 3-1. When you come 2 weeks from now, you take the question that you're confident you can answer well, and on a blank piece of paper with no notes, write the answer to that question using examples from your own life. If you do that, you'll get a very high A on that question. If you give the answer and you give an example that's just, it could be anybody, it's a generic example, then you'll get a B, somewhere about 80% of the value of the question. If you give the full answer, all 5 categories of power, and you give no example, then you get 70% of the value of the question. So it's really good if you give me the entire answer and that the example is specific to you. Now you're going to write the essay on the one question you chose, but you're also going to pick at random one of the other 16. Here's how this will work. I will come to class with these questions on slips of paper. At the beginning of class, you'll come and draw 2 of them. Let me explain why 2. For you to take the test, you have to write 2 essays. Only one of them is one that was drawn at random. But let's imagine you came to class planning to write on the 5 categories of power because you like that question, and then you come and you draw, and that's the one you draw. Well, where's your second question supposed to come from? So everybody will draw 2 of them. You still get to write on the question that you chose and that you like. For the other one, pick one of the 2 that you drew. If you draw 2 of them and one is the one you chose, that's fine. Your second question can be the other one you drew randomly. Does anyone have any questions about the format of the exam? One detail I thought of while standing here. I still don't know if Tsuda usually provides you with blue books to write your essays in. Some colleges do, because I don't know where to get them. If you could bring with you paper. From the time I used this exam format before, I don't think anyone needed more than maybe 2 sheets of paper. These are not essays where you need to write and write and write. I don't give more points for longer answers. So if you'll bring paper, that would be good. And I'll pause a couple more seconds in case someone is still thinking about a question. Okay. Let me pop out of here and over to here. That's not right. How did that happen? Bear with me a moment while I get the technology to work properly. Oh, come on. Work. All right. Now, I think I'm in charge. So one other thing that's going to happen next week. Actually, let me tell you a couple of things that are going to happen next week. The syllabus says that the topic of the last class meeting is intercultural research on conflict. But we started that topic at the first class meeting when we talked about face negotiation theory. So we've been doing the intercultural part of the class all along. So I changed what we're doing next week. The last topic we're taking up today, we're going to talk about assertiveness. Next week, we're going to do 90 minutes of exercises where you will pair off with other people in class and you will practice assertiveness. That's why there are no essay questions for next week, because there will be no new content. You'll take what we talk about today and you'll practice it. One other thing I want to do, because it's the last class meeting except for the final exam, when I teach a college class, at the last class meeting, I don't require, but I invite my students to pose for a picture together. Now, when I've taught conflict in the past, they came up with an idea that I think is kind of funny. We will see if you are entertained by it. They pretend that they're fighting. Because if you've taken a conflict class and you get in a fight at the last class meeting, maybe you didn't learn enough. Now, I'm not making this up. This is the class from 10 years ago. He is now in the last term of working on his doctorate in communication, and he is teaching my classes while I'm here in Japan. I emailed him this morning. A couple years later, I taught this class. This guy down here on the floor went on to get his master's degree in conflict and dispute resolution, and next week, he is having the first meeting of this class that you're currently in the United States at my university. This was our fighting picture the next time we had the class, and then we had the pandemic. And in the pandemic, you couldn't get that close together, so they all pretended that it was Star Wars, and they fought like Jedi using the Force. And then the last thing I thought I would show you, before this class started, a previous class ended, argumentation and debate. And near the end of argumentation and debate, we had a class picture right here. So I'm not requiring anybody. I don't want to pressure anybody. But what I'm going to do next week at the end of class, not the start, at the end, is I am going to take two pictures. You don't have to be in either one. But the first picture will be one that I take home that nobody else will see. I have in my office one of those electronic frames that shows pictures and changes every 10 seconds. You'll be on that. And then when my students in the future see your picture come up and ask, "Who's that?" I'll tell them about you. The second picture I'll take next week, if you want to be in it, is one that I will put on my Instagram. Now, I don't like Instagram especially, but my students back in the United States, they begged me, please make an Instagram and put pictures on it because they're curious, what is Japan like? And when I put this picture up, they loved it. It was one of their favorites so far. They are so curious about you. So you have that choice next week if you want to. And because we're doing it at the end of class, if you don't want to be in the pictures, you can leave a couple minutes early. Final thing, because we are getting to the end of the class, if you want to stay in touch, this is my line. I don't think I'm going to do anything with it after I leave Japan, but for the time being, while I am here, if that's a way of connecting that you want to have, that is something available to you. All right. The final 3 essay questions in this class for the final exam. Explain how changing your spoken attributions can help you not to escalate a conflict. Because I see people typing, I'll pause a moment. Second, explain the elements of conversational receptiveness. And third, explain the essence of assertiveness and guidelines for interdependent communicators. The essence of assertiveness and the guidelines for interdependent communicators. So, as you will have guessed, the last class meeting before the holiday break, we talked about the process of negotiating. And I began that day by saying, my field is communication, and we had not until that day said that much about communication. So we talked about negotiating, which is a communication project. These three specific communication behaviors are the ones that turn up in the research as variables that if you change what you do, you will be more successful in handling conflict. Now, because these are social science terms, I went looking to see if I could find a suitable translation. And where I found people writing in Japanese about attributions, the word they used, I'll try to pronounce it right, kizoku. And where they wrote about conversational receptiveness, what they used was juyosei. And when it came to assertiveness, it was interesting. There were 2 or 3 different kanji used for assertiveness, but the majority, by a good margin, just spelled it out in katakana. So, assertiveness. So I think we're just going to go with that. But we will start with attributions. And I'll start by defining what an attribution is. When information comes to you, when something comes in through one of your 5 senses, and you then make up an explanation for why that information exists, that is an attribution. A really simple example. What if you right now smelled something, and you thought about it, and you thought, it smells like someone's cooking, and then you thought, oh, it smells really tasty. Someone must be making yakitori. The smell would be the information. And if you said someone's cooking and they're actually cooking something good, that's your attribution. That's the explanation for where the information's coming from. Or, as I'm up here talking, if you suddenly heard, ruff, ruff, your attribution might be someone's out walking their dog. Now, your attribution doesn't have to be right. It could be someone was watching a movie on their laptop and has really good speakers, and you thought it was a dog and it was actually a computer. The explanation that you come up with for the information that comes in through your senses, the explanation is the attribution. When we talk about attribution in the social sciences, we're usually talking about attribution of behavior. You observe other people's behavior, and you make up an explanation for why they behave that way. If you know someone who is always late for everything, a common attribution for that behavior is they're very disorganized, they're very immature, they think they're so important that everybody else can just wait on them. But you might find out they might have a family member who has a severe disability, and they might often, with no warning, have to take care of their family member. Maybe that's why they run late all the time. All we can observe is the behavior. We don't know the reason why, but we fill in the reason why, And those reasons that we fill in, those are our attributions. Now, in talking about how attributions make a difference in relationships in general, and specifically in conflict, we can put them into three categories. We can say of our attribution that someone's behavior was chosen or it was not. You chose to behave that way, or you didn't choose to behave that way. You did it accidentally. You did it because you were under pressure. You did it because you thought you had no choice. So a behavior was chosen or it was not. The second category, when we are attributing behavior, we might say, you always do it, or you just did it this time. You always do this, or you just did it this time. And the third category, you behave this way with everything, or you only behave this way with this one thing. You behave this way with everything or with one thing. And the interesting thing about these categories, the difference seems to be whether we like the person or dislike them, and then whether the attribution is positive or negative, whether we like them or don't, and whether the attribution is positive or negative. If you really, really are feeling very positive towards someone, then when you talk about their positive behavior, you're likely to say that it's chosen, that they always do it, and that they do it with everything. You always work so hard to make everything in our lives better. You might say that to the person you love the most. That would be a big compliment. And then if they do something that you don't like, something that hurts your feelings, but you still are in a good positive relationship, you might say, well, just this once, you did this one thing and you probably didn't even mean to. So it wasn't chosen because you didn't mean to. Just this once you did it, so it's not always. And it was just this one thing. Now, when you really don't like someone, you tend to do the same thing with negative statements about this. You always do this. You always ruin everything, and you do it on purpose. So it's chosen because you do it on purpose. You always ruin everything. Always and everything. And if someone you don't like does something good that benefits you, for once you did something considerate for me, and you probably didn't even mean to. So those categories of attributions, what shows up a lot when Americans talk about their conflicts, two things are happening. First of all, the conflict, our example over the weeks has been your roommate playing their music too loud. The person you're talking to has been behaving in a way that's made a problem for you. And also, it's just stressful and difficult to talk about conflict. And actually, I meant to change to talking about conflict. It's stressful and difficult to talk about, to try to talk your way through a conflict. So commonly, what you have to stop and do is check. Are you making the negative attributions because you are frustrated, because you're caught in the grip of your emotions? You may find when you deal with conflict, try to have a conflict conversation with someone in the United States, that they may make some of those negative attributions. You always do this. You do this with everything. You procrastinate. Wait too long to start working with everything. You always have something to say. Always and everything. And even if something happens that's beyond your control, you may find that they talk as though you chose it. Because if they're feeling especially frustrated, then if they say that you chose it, that gives them an excuse to feel even angrier at you. So what counselors will often do in helping Westerners to deal with conflict conversations in a more effective and healthy way that helps the relationship, try to catch yourself saying that people always do this and stop and say, wait, no, you don't always do that. I'm just feeling frustrated. Catch yourself saying, you do this with everything, and say, wait, no, you don't do it with everything. I just feel angry. And especially, it gets very tempting to assume that someone, when they do something that makes a problem, to assume that they chose to do it. But anybody who works to moderate conflict, to try to help people work through their conflicts, anyone who does that job for very long, what they learn right away is often people on both sides behave the way they do because they don't think they have any choice. They feel like they're pressured into it. And when both sides understand that, then some of this, you're doing it deliberately, some of these attributions can get cooled off a little bit. Now, I want to say one more thing about attributions. Nobody is saying that you should always pick this time, this one thing you probably didn't mean to. Nobody's saying you should always do that, because that is a pattern of behavior that victims of domestic violence often do. They'll be in a relationship where their partner is hitting them or in other ways attacking them in ways that are unacceptable. And they'll make excuses. And they'll say it was just this one time. They don't do it all the time. They don't do it with everything, and they probably didn't mean to. It's also a pattern you sometimes see when parents will make excuses for children who are acting out in a way that makes everybody else unsafe. So you can go from a bad situation for conflict into an equally bad situation for making excuses for bad behavior if you're not careful. But what this principle says is, take a look at saying they always do it, take a look at saying they do it about everything, and especially take a look at saying they do it on purpose. And if on any of those three, if you're saying it because you feel angry, and when you cool down, if you can say, okay, it's not all the time, it's not everything, and you're not doing it on purpose, that's a way you can stop conflict from escalating. So that is what there is to say about changing attributions. I'm going to pause here. I'm going to watch some people think about that and some wheels turn. And if you have any questions about that, this would be a good time. Okay. Let us move then. Of the three things we're taking on today, this is the most recent one. This is research that is only 2 or 3 years old. Conversational receptiveness. This is the work of Julia Minson. Julia Minson is a professor of government at Harvard. Her specialty is negotiation. And for a very long time, people have been given the advice, when you deal with difficult conflict, try to put yourself in the other person's position. Try to think about what it looks like to them. What she found through her research is, a lot of people do that when trying to work through a conflict, but the other person can't tell. It's invisible to the other person. So conversational receptiveness, that's a set of behaviors that show the other person that you are paying attention to what they think. She has 4 main elements and a memory trick for them. The English word is here, referring to trying to pick up sound. And the 4 elements are, first of all, hedge. Hedge. Now, in the social sciences and in communication in particular, when we use the word hedge, we mean don't make absolute statements. Instead, use words like maybe, possibly, I think. Something I've noticed from talking with people since I arrived in Japan is a lot more of this goes on in everyday talk. A lot of people in just answering questions use a lot of maybe and I think. Well, Westerners don't always. But when you talk about a conflict, when you soften the things you say, and you don't make them sound as though you're positive you're right, that's one of the behaviors included in conversational receptiveness. Now, the second one, emphasize agreement. Emphasize where you agree. So what was the name of your favorite artist again that you went to the concert? Culture.
Japanese idol.
Okay. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I was just trying to hear the name of the group, and I'm very hard of hearing. Kajari 8. I'm probably going to mess it up no matter how I try. So I was trying to use that as my example. Instead, let us imagine your roommate is playing their music too loud, and what your roommate always plays is the Beatles. Now, instead of saying, would you turn your music down? I can't study. Maybe the way to emphasize agreement is to say, you know what? The Beatles are great. I love them. They make me happy every time I hear them. But right now I'm trying to concentrate on my studying and you're playing this great Beatles music. And I want to listen to the Beatles and not study and I'm going to flunk my test. And if you come at it that way, you know that they love the Beatles. You love the Beatles too. When you start by emphasizing where you agree. Or, let's see, what else might you have a conflict about? In the United States, there are a lot of parents who will come to meetings about the school, and they'll argue about how the school teachers are teaching lessons to the children. And sometimes, what the teacher will say is, well, what we all have in common is we all want to see your child succeed. You want your child to succeed? I want your child to succeed, or I wouldn't come to work every day. So start with what you know you agree on. And when you do that, that's a way of showing the other person that you have paid attention to how they think about the conflict. The A is acknowledge. Now, what Professor Minson means by acknowledge is say back to them what they've said to you about their opinion. So who in here, let's see if anyone will take me up on this, really likes having hair on your head and thinks there's a good reason to have hair on your head? Anybody? A reason to have hair on your head. Let's hear one. Because you know I don't believe in it. Oh, hairstyles. Yeah, you could have pretty hairstyles. So what you're saying is that people who have hair on their head, they can be creative, they can have an attractive hairstyle, they can enjoy picking out a hairstyle. That's a good reason to have hair on your head? That's what you do when you're talking through the conflict and they give you a reason, repeat it back to them. Show that you really did hear them. What Americans do too often in talking about conflict is they jump right in and say why it's wrong. What do you mean hairstyles? There are a zillion people in this country that are the exact same hairstyle as you, and your hair gets blown around by the wind, and it gets all messed up anyway. Yeah, so if I jump on what you say, and I say, you're wrong, then I'm not showing I listened. But if I can repeat back your reason, it shows that I listened. And that is what Minson says, it's not enough to, in your mind, think about what they're thinking. You got to show them. The fourth and final element of conversational receptiveness, reframe to the positive. Reframe to the positive. What she means is, don't always talk about what you don't like. Talk about what you do like and why you like it. So maybe, if your roommate plays their music too loud, you might say, yesterday afternoon, I sat down to study, and it was so peaceful and it was so quiet. I started concentrating right away, and I got done with all my studying even quicker than usual, and then I was able to put some really good music on and enjoy it. It's so good when it stays quiet just long enough for me to get my studying done. If you say it that way, instead of, I can't study with this music playing, talk about what you do like. There's a psychological principle that when we know there's something we can do that will make someone else happy, we can give them something that will help them to thrive. We like doing it. It feels good. And if you come to your roommate and say, if this apartment is quiet for 1 hour and I get my studying done, that would be beautiful. You're giving them the opportunity to help you. But we also don't like it when people tell us what to do. So if you take that exact same request and say, would you turn that music down? I can't concentrate. We don't like being told to stop something we're doing. So the last of the principles in conversational receptiveness is, talk about what you do like and why it's good. If you're raising a child who won't clean their room, then mention a time when their room was clean, or mention a time when they helped with something, and describe it as, that made me feel so good, and it was so nice. And they have an opportunity then to do something good. We sometimes, in the United States, in training young parents or parents of children who misbehave, will use the phrase, you have to catch them being good. Because parents get in the habit of catching their child being bad and telling them when they're being bad. And some parents never tell their children that they're being good. But if you tell them they're doing something good, they will do that again. And that principle applies here. Try to take what you're talking about in the conflict and reframe it to something positive. Now, since her first wave of research, she's added on just one more behavior. Because some work that her colleagues had done, it said that if you ask questions, then people like it when you ask questions because it shows that you're listening to them. But someone pointed out to her, you can't say it that way. And she was saying, ask questions about what they just said. And her colleague said to her, you can't say it that way because the question they'll ask is, how can anyone possibly believe something as stupid as what you just said to me? Because that's a question. So then she said, the kind of question you have to ask the question, please tell me more about that. Please elaborate. And those elements put together, good heavens, my notes are a mess. Hedging, that's the one I couldn't remember. Hedging, emphasizing agreement, acknowledgement, reframing to positive, and then asking the question, please tell me more about that. What Professor Minson has done, she's trained a lot of people to go into their workplace in conflict situations, use those behaviors consistently in dealing with their conflicts. And these have been the results that her research has shown. First, and this is all from the report of the other party. So, if Bob and Fred are working through a conflict, and Professor Minson trains Bob in conversational receptiveness, Fred will now report these things about Bob. First of all, Fred will say that it's easier to trust Bob. Trust goes up. We said fairly early in this class that dealing with conflict is honestly not that complicated. It's getting the two sides to get creative about solving the problem together. The reason it often doesn't happen is they don't trust each other. And what Professor Minson's data showed was consistently using the conversational receptiveness behaviors led them to trust one another more. Second, she said, Fred will say about Bob that he is more objective. More objective. Now, we talked a couple of class meetings ago about defensiveness. Defensiveness, always feeling that you're being attacked. And in conflict, that is a big problem. A lot of times, if two people in conflict try to talk honestly about each other's behavior, one or the other will feel defensive. They'll think that they're being attacked. It becomes painful. This describes the solution to that. Being objective is being able to say, you're right, that behavior of mine is a problem, and not feel defensive, not feel threatened or insecure. When you can be objective, you can have a discussion of your behavior as though it was somebody else's behavior and be very reasonable and very calm. The third thing that shows up, Fred would say of Bob that he had better judgment, that he could think clearly about the problem, and that he had good ideas about what to do. And the last two things Minson's research found were behaviors that Fred would then show, that the party who had not received the training, they would say they were more willing to talk. They found it rewarding to talk about the conflict, and they felt motivated to do it. And finally, they would match the behavior. They would start behaving the same way. So if you paid careful attention to those behaviors, and you started showing them in conflicts you had with people from the West, they're likely to have a good impression of you, that you're trustworthy, that you're objective and not defensive, and that you have good judgment. And then they will be more willing to talk about the conflict, and they will start behaving the same way. The final thing that Minson took up in explaining this was to talk about why it is that we don't necessarily do it. And she said the reason is emotion. Westerners in conflict hear someone say something and get angry at it and want to attack that wrong idea. They think of that wrong idea almost like a mosquito, like a bug or a spider that needs to be swatted. And so they want to attack. And they don't necessarily see clearly that they're attacking you. A common thing, sadly, in the year 2023, that Westerners will do, they'll use a big accusation because they think of it as a big weapon. So they will say, you're a liar, you're a thief, you're racist, you're sexist. Because in their mind, that's like a big hammer, boom, that you can hit the bad idea with, boom. And they don't think about the fact you can pick up your hammer and hit them right back. The other thing Minson says, Westerners make the mistake when talking about conflict, they make the mistake of trying to do it quickly. They want to end the conversation as quickly as possible. So if they say the meanest, most nasty thing they can, they'll end the conversation. Part of it is because they think what the other person is saying, it's what we've said before, it's wrong and it needs to be destroyed. But the other thing is, it's just not very enjoyable to talk about conflict. It's very stressful. And the thing that Minson says about that, of the three elements we showed before, hedging, expressing agreement, acknowledging, and then reframing to the positive, she said the third one, the acknowledgement, where you repeat back the reason they gave you, that's the best one to slow the conversation down. Because when you spend part of your turn, when it's your turn to talk, and you give part of your time away, making sure you understand them, what cannot happen is the conversation does not escalate. It doesn't speed up. You make sure you understand them, and then you say what you have to say, and it slows everything down. She also said that part where talking about the conflict is painful and stressful and difficult, when you repeat back the reason they gave you, it's not. It becomes a lot calmer. And you seem like a much more reasonable person to handle conflict with. All right. That brings us to the end of talking about receptiveness. So for the second time today, I'm going to pause and see if you have questions you want to ask me. All right. Bringing us then to the third. All right. You may recall that all the way back at the beginning of this class, when we introduced face negotiation theory, we said that there are characteristic conflict behaviors for people with an independent self-construal who are concerned with self-face. And then there are conflict behaviors characteristic of someone with an interdependent self-construal concerned with other face. So these behaviors are more characteristic of people from the United States. Defending, yelling at the top of their lungs, and fighting. And these behaviors, honestly, are more characteristic of people from Japan. In conflict, yielding, avoiding, or bringing in an outsider. The very first thing I want to say about assertiveness, and this is the very first part of answering the essay question. The simple way of understanding assertiveness is balancing them both. The simple way I teach it back in the United States is assertiveness is respect for yourself and respect for the other at the same time. Because too many people in conflict either go in with lots of respect for themselves, and if you have lots of respect for yourself, you will fight to win that conflict. That conflict is a game or a war, and you are playing to win. If you have lots of respect for the other and not as much respect for yourself, then what you are likely to do is try to do what's necessary to calm them down. Get them back into a positive frame of mind. But the healthy way in the long term, the sustainable and healthy way to talk about conflict is to balance them both. Respect for the other, and at the same time, respect for yourself. So we talked, when we introduced face negotiation theory, about mutual face. How can I, at the same time, make myself look good and make you look good? How can I, at the same time, advocate for what I want, which is self-face concern, but also show that I value the relationship, which is other-face concern? All right. That brings us then to a set of guidelines. And I'm going to divide the screen in half. And on the left, I am going to walk you through what I teach to college students in the United States. The guidelines I give to people concerned with self-face, people who have an independent self-construal. But then on the right, I'm going to give you some guidelines. I want you to understand them both. The essay question only asks you to remember the ones that are on the right. Okay, so teaching assertiveness to people from the United States, I have to teach some things not to do, some things to do. First, when you're being assertive, you don't confront. You don't confront. You don't go in intending to win. You don't use force. You don't yell. You don't think of them as an opponent. A second don't. You don't overpower them. If they disagree with you, you don't try to say something harsh. You don't raise your volume. You don't treat it like a wrestling match. A specific one, you don't describe the other person. You don't describe the other person. This is one of the most simple and specific things that when I teach it to American college students, it changes how they handle conflict. Because when they are talking with a roommate or a family member or the person they're dating, and the conflict spins out of hand, they start to say, you always do this. You just think that you're the center of everything. You did this and it was terrible. It was a complete disaster. You. And those descriptions, you do this because you're lazy. You do this because you have a big ego. You do this because you're a narcissist. That's not helping with the conflict. So step back from describing the other person. Don't give a theory of why the other person is doing such awful things. That doesn't help. That's a way of showing respect for yourself and not respect for the other person. So that's one of the things to stop doing if you want to be effectively assertive. Now, the things that they should do. They should be respectful. The tone that they take, the words that they use, should be the kind of tone and the kind of words they would use if it was a positive conversation. They should also be cheerful. If you want to be assertive, it's important that you not go in angry. You might feel angry. You might temporarily have to postpone your anger or hide your anger if you want to effectively speak assertively. It is furthermore appropriate to even be affectionate with the other person. So, this example that I'm beating to death about your roommate playing their music too loud. The disrespectful way to approach your roommate would be to say, would you turn that down? I can't study because I can't concentrate. That's confrontational. With my anger, I'm trying to overpower. Maybe I throw in, you're so inconsiderate. You never think about the fact that I have to study. So I'm describing the other. I'm not being respectful, definitely not cheerful, and light years away from affectionate. What does it sound like if I am being assertive? It's very simple. The music's playing, I'm trying to study, I get up and I say, hey, I know you love that music, I have a test tomorrow. So let's figure out a time when you can listen to your music and have a lot of fun and I can still pass all my classes. When you talk like that, cheerful, you like the person, you're confident that you're making a reasonable request, and you're just stating facts. And I guess you did describe them, but you described them by saying, I know you love that music. That's even a good moment to say, I love it too. But that's being assertive. I respect you, and I'm speaking respectfully to you. I respect myself enough that I'm going to describe the situation, and I'm going to tell you what I need. And that's assertiveness. So some guidelines for people who have an interdependent self-construal and are concerned with other faiths. Don't. Assertiveness number 1 is don't apologize. Don't apologize. No sumimasen. No gomen. Do not apologize. It is very tempting in that little role play I did for you real quick a second ago to say, I'm sorry, but I'm trying to study. That's not assertive. I know you love the music. It's good music. But I have a test tomorrow and I need to study. That's showing respect for yourself. A second don't, if you want to be assertive, don't allow them to interrupt you. Very commonly, when I have had to help people grow in their assertiveness, I've had to help them develop enough confidence that if the other person tries to interrupt them, the expression is they stand their ground. But what I would mean by that is you are confident enough that if they try to interrupt you, say, please, I'm not finished. Please, I have one more thing to say. You respect them, so you speak calmly to them, but you have a right to speak, and you're going to say what you need to say. The things you should do when you're being assertive. You should speak of yourself. I have a test tomorrow. I study a lot better when it's quiet because that helps me concentrate. You also should name your feelings. And really, what I meant to put there was not the word feeling, I meant to put the word emotion. Name your emotion. It's okay to tell someone when you're trying to speak assertively about a conflict, it's okay to say, I'm feeling very worried about this test tomorrow. I'm feeling under a lot of pressure to do well on this test tomorrow. Chiefly because we often think in the United States, other people just know how we feel. We assume that we are more clear about our emotions than we really are. And sometimes you just have to tell people. And if you are going to interact with Westerners at any point in the future, they have not been brought up reading the air. They may not have any idea what emotion this situation is giving you unless you name it. So Assertiveness 101 is tell them how you're feeling. Tell them that you feel frustrated. Tell them that you feel whatever it is that you feel. It is also in order to make requests. Tell them what you would like for them to do. And it doesn't have to be, you can still frame it as positive. You can say, give me about 1 hour to get my studying done, and then let's put that great music on and let's both enjoy it. But tell them that's what you want. Don't leave it up to them to try to fill in what they should do. When you're being assertive, the point of being assertive is that it's important to be direct. Now, one thing I should say right here, the about 10 minutes I've spent on this is the reason that the United States government and the Japanese government have paid to bring me over here. When I first decided to apply for the Fulbright grant, I went and I did some research. What is it that with my background in communication I could help with? And the Ministry of Education and Tourism has said the biggest, most gaping hole in language instruction in Japan is assertiveness. Japanese students come out of education with really good English skills, except they get into business negotiations with people from India and Australia and New Zealand and some from the United States and some from Europe. And all those other English speakers are really good at being assertive because they've done it since childhood. And Japanese English speakers know the language, but bring with you the other face concerns, the amplified respect for other people and not showing as much respect for yourself. And in negotiation, this becomes a real problem. And the English speakers from these other countries, the reputation is that the Japanese are so polite that you just have to get forceful with them and they get flustered and you get what you want. So, this 10 minutes of lecture material is not going to work any miracles. The reason that we are spending next week on a full 90 minutes of exercise is for you to get a sense of what does it sound like and what does it feel like when you are being properly assertive. If I had just come in here and lectured for 10 minutes on how to drive a car and you'd never driven one in your life, you would not be ready to walk out of here and go drive a car. You would need to get behind the wheel and practice driving for a while. So this is just meant to warm you up. It's just meant to give you, first of all, what the essence of assertiveness is, which is balancing respect for self with respect for the other. Or you could answer that question by saying to balance self-face concern and other face concern to make mutual face concern. And then, of the basic elements of assertiveness, the ones that are the higher priority for other face-concerned, interdependent people from a collective culture are these, which is why, if you get that essay question, those are the ones you should write about. You try to write about all this, you'll be here for 3 hours instead of 90 minutes. So just focus on that. All of that was the introduction to basic assertiveness. I have about 2 more things to say before I start to wind down the class. But, as I have done at the end of every topic so far, I'm going to pause. Because that would be a good thing if there are parts of it you're not understanding, that's a good thing for you to ask me questions about. All right. There are 2 specific behaviors that when I teach assertiveness to American college students, 2 specific behaviors, and they both will show up next week in the exercises that we do. So I'm going to tell you about them both right now. One of them is very simple. It's so simple that I'm not going to put anything up on the slides because you won't need it. The other one is more complicated, so there will be some visuals with the second one. The first one, I guess I could have put this up on the slide, but the name for it is an English idiom. We call it the broken record. Broken record. So today, when you play music, I would assume it's probably streamed, it's probably on your phone. Because I am very old, when I was a child, the way you played music was on records. And if there was a scratch in the record, the needle would get to the scratch, and it would play the same little bit of the song over and over and over again. Well, that's what that's referring to. One of the ways to be assertive sometimes, when people keep pushing and pushing and pushing, is to just repeat the same thing. What they hope will happen is you'll get frustrated, you'll get angry, you'll get worked up, you'll be uncomfortable, and you'll finally give in. And when you just very calmly repeat the same thing you said before, that is a technique of being assertive. So, let's see. If Yagi-san were to say, Schrader-sensei or Doyo-sensei, is it okay if I pack up my laptop and just leave right now? I might say, class ends at 2:30. But it's a beautiful day outside. I want to go and sit and enjoy the... Class ends at 2:30. But you're robbing me of my life and my youth, and I'm only going to be like this for a few more... Class ends at 2:30. And I don't raise my voice, and I don't in any way show her that she's wearing me down. I just repeat what I have to say. So that's all there is to that particular tactic, and yet you would be surprised how well it works. If you deal with a lot of Westerners in your workplace after college, they may sometimes make an unreasonable request and come at you again and again different ways to try to get you to say yes. And all you have to do to be assertive, you're being respectful of them, but you're also being respectful of yourself. Just a short, calm answer, and you repeat it. That's the first tactic, and that's why I didn't put up any visuals, because it honestly is that simple. The second tactic is something that we, in teaching assertiveness, call an I statement. An I statement. It's sometimes called clear message format. Clear message format. Here are the parts of an I statement. The first thing you do, you describe the behavior that is the problem. Describe the behavior that is the problem. And when you describe it, do so in language that does not show that you're unhappy. Do so in language that is neutral and just states facts. So my other example from today was, you might be raising a child who never cleans their room. You would not start by saying, when your room is a complete mess, because that language shows that you're unhappy. But what you might say is, when your clean laundry is on the floor, and your toys are not in their toy box, and there's food in your room, those are facts. Your toys are right there. Clothes are right there. Food is right there. Those are facts. So you've described the situation neutrally. That's the first thing. Describe the behavior that is a problem. Then what you do, interpret. Interpret. Say what you think the other person is thinking. Say, we talked at the beginning of class today about attributions. Tell the other person your attribution. I think what you are thinking is. So maybe you say to your child, I think you are having so much fun playing that you forget that you need to put your clean clothes away. I have a real example from a few years ago. A student of mine, having had this class, came back and told me about this real situation. She worked in a shop, and it made fruit juice smoothies, and it sold them, fruit juice drinks. She very commonly was assigned to open the store at 7 o'clock in the morning. And she had another employee who was supposed to show up and open it with her. But that employee was always late. And a lot of people would come to that shop and they would get a fruit smoothie for breakfast. So she'd get there to open the shop and there'd be a huge line. She'd have to take care of all of them by herself. They got angry because the service was slow and they'd complain to the manager and she'd get in trouble. Well, that employee who ran late all the time, When she finally talked with them about it, she said, I think you think that when we open the store, there's nobody here because it's so early. I think you think that at 7 a.m. nobody's in this store. And you're actually wrong. There are lots of people in this store at 7 a.m. So, you offer up an explanation of what you think they are thinking. Then what you do, name your emotion. I feel disappointed because I want to think of you as a good fellow employee. I want to think of you as my partner, and the two of us are working to make this store successful. But when you don't show up at 7 a.m., when 7 a.m. comes and you're not here, I think you're thinking nobody's here at 7 a.m., even though the store is full of people. I feel disappointed because I want to think of you as a good partner. Then, explain the difficulty it creates for you. The difficulty it creates for you. And here's where my students said, all these customers who are here at 7, they complain because the service is so slow. And they complain to the manager, and then I get written up. And the only reason I'm slow is because you're not here to help me. Now the reason these 3 steps go in here, these 2 at least are in here because the other person in the conflict might not know. They might not know how you feel. They might not know how it creates a problem for you. And what Americans commonly do in conflict is they'll yell these things. But if they tell them calmly, if they just explain them, that's a way of being assertive. That you have enough respect for yourself to bring the issue, to tell the other person in the conflict about the problem, but you have enough respect for them that you tell it calmly. As for this one, it's not so much that they may not know, it's that you give them the opportunity to correct you. They might say, that's not what I was thinking. Here actually is what I was thinking. And that's good, because if they do that calmly, then the two of you are having a good conversation about the problem. If, on the other hand, they say, that is what I was thinking, you were right, that's a moment where they're likely to recognize that you have shown good judgment. And that's also something that builds confidence. The 5th part of an I statement is the next step. The next step. This takes one of 2 forms. First, you might ask them. You might make a request of them. So, when 7 a.m. comes and you're not here, I think that you think there's just nobody in the store at 7 a.m., which is wrong. A lot of people come here for their breakfast. I feel disappointed in you because, I want you to be my good fellow employee, my partner, and we work to make this shop run well. I get written up because the service is so slow, and then I'm in trouble with the manager. So please, from now on, could you be here by 7 a.m.? You can make your request here. The other form this can take is to say what's going to happen next time if they do it again. Which is why we call it the next step and not the request. A request could be asking them for a certain thing to happen next, but it could also be saying, this is what I will do next. So she might get all the way down to here and say, so the next time we both open, if you're not here at 7, right then I'm going to call the manager and say, you're not here again. Now you may have noticed, there's a number and a number, but then there are bullet points. That's not poor editing on my part, that was deliberate. Because what's widely accepted among people who teach assertiveness and conflict skills is, these 3 can come in any order. You could name the difficulty, you could name the emotion first, do these in any order you want. But describing needs to come first. The next step needs to come last. Put these 3 steps in any order you like. And I will also say, the first few times you do this, and this is what I always tell my American college students, the first few times you do it, especially as an exercise in class, it feels fake. It feels like nobody talks this way. It feels like you're reading a script in a badly written play. And my answer to that, and I think you've heard me say this before in this class, the first time you ride a bicycle, you're wobbly. You do this to train yourself to include all these things when you need to have a hard conversation and you need to be direct. You will develop ways of putting it into your own words. You will develop ways of saying it in your own style. But if you just try to have these conversations the way that comes naturally to you, and in the past that hasn't gone so well, this is something to try that the research says when you include all these things, it goes better. Because the things the other person does not know, you tell them, and you tell them calmly. So that's what the point of this is. It's an exercise in how to do assertiveness, not leaving out anything that needs to be included. Okay. The final couple of thoughts I have for you before we wind it down. You will never be good at assertiveness until, it's just like any other difficult thing you've ever learned. You'll never be good at it until you start with not being good at it and feeling like you're bad at it and muddling through. But what the government of the nation of Japan agrees with a whole lot of researchers on is this is the big missing piece in using your English effectively in intercultural encounters with English speakers from other parts of the world. There's nothing else that's missing. Not intelligence, not work ethic, but assertiveness is missing. So even if right now it just seems bizarre to you, this is something other people grew up with. Their parents encouraged them to do it. And the better you are at it, the more likely you are to be successful in those situations where you want to use your English. Okay, that is the end of my pep talk having to do with assertiveness. And so, for the fourth time today, although I am becoming less optimistic, for the fourth time today I'm going to wander down here and see. Is there anything that I've talked about that you want to say, what if, what about? Is there anything that I blew through too quickly? I know when I get excited, I speed up and I use more English idioms. Is there anything I need to clarify? Then I will give you one more friendly reminder that we have two other assignments in the class apart from the final exam. There is the You Be the Judge, where you pick a column from that, one particular column from that feature that runs in the Guardian newspaper, and you pick out elements we've talked about in the class that you can find in that column. And then there's The Project, where you take a conflict that you are in or have been in, and you explain how concepts from the class clarify what's going on in a conflict that's happened to you. And that's the one from which you can get your examples for the final exam. The time for those to get done is starting to run out. The deadline for me to submit grades is February 2nd. Not for everybody, but for enough of the class that those assignments need to be turned in by then. So you've got about 3 weeks. And the earlier you knock those out, the more time you're going to have to deal with the more intense assignments in some of your other classes. But that's advice, which you didn't ask for. Okay. Then, last thing, one of these days I really got to get this memorized. You would have thought the holiday break would have been the ideal time, but it didn't happen. 主があなたを祝福し、あなたを守られますように。主が御子をあなたに照らし、あなたを恵まれますように。主が御子をあなたに向け、あなたに平安を与えられますように。Class is dismissed. I will see you in a week.